We're going to be looking at molecular evidence for evolution and relatedness. Specifically, we're going to be looking at phylogenetic trees to show relatedness between species. So we've looked at molecular evidence and how that can be used to determine relatedness between species, and now we're going to put this into practice of what it would look like in an evolutionary relationship. So phylogenetic trees are ways of describing evolution or evolutionary relatedness between species, and they typically describe divergent evolution as based on shared characteristics. So this is a description of what a phylogenetic tree looks like. You're not required to name or be able to describe the specific and subgroups or specific parts or components of this phylogenetic tree. This is just showing you a description of what is happening. And we have an ancestor or a common ancestor over here that will diverge or split via a node, as you can see there, and that will split again, and this is a branch that will produce that species, etc., etc. So if we look here, evolutionary time, so the time since the Earth's begun, the oldest branch will be the oldest common ancestor, and the most recent branch will be the most recent common ancestor. So we can see that sharks are very distantly related to lizards because they have diverged a long time ago. So they do not share, or they will not share very many DNA sequences or amino acid sequences over time because they have mutated over time or changed over time. We can see that lizards and relatives in mammals are the most closely related species because they have diverged or become their own species the most recently, which means they'll have less time to have nucleotide substitutions or amino acid substitutions, meaning they are most closely related. Although they are very different looking organisms and they definitely cannot reproduce, they are the most similar in the selection of organisms we have here. Cladograms are another way of describing or representing evolutionary relationships. They are specifically looking at relationships of related organisms, and they're constructed by finding the simplest arrangement of shared derived characteristics in a group. So for example, we have various different characteristics of various different species, which are shown here, and then we rank them. If they share that species, if they have a vertebral column, sharks, if it's a yes, it will be a 1. If they do not have that species, that feature in that species, it'll be such as a bony skeleton, it's a 0. So using this table here, we construct a cladogram where the species which have the least relations or the least features that are similar between, so the sharks and kin have the least features in common, will be the most distant related from the species that has the most of these features in common. So things like the primate and things like dinosaurs and birds are going to be the most different from sharks because they have the most difference in their features. These are some differences between cladograms and phylogenetic trees. So a phylogenetic tree is an evolutionary tree and it shows evolutionary relationships, whereas a cladogram is not an evolutionary tree. It doesn't show evolutionary relationships. It's talking about the characteristics and how they're similar. Phylogenetic trees, they show the history of the organisms, and that's through divergent evolution. However, cladograms are a hypothesis about how evolutionary history of a group, so they don't have to always be true. Cladograms are drawn with equal length, and the branches do not represent evolutionary distance, but phylogenetic trees, the evolutionary distance is represented by the length. So if we look at the length of these particular bands here, they'll show the evolutionary distance between the species. Cladograms don't indicate the amount of evolutionary time for separating for an organism's taxa, whereas phylogenetic trees do, which I just showed you just before. This is the summary of the lesson. Phylogenetic trees demonstrate relatedness between species, and cladograms demonstrate relatedness. However, there are caveats, and these are the key terms. You should now be able to identify a phylogenetic tree and a cladogram and identify the relatedness using these particular examples and use molecular evidence to construct a phylogenetic tree. If you need extra assistance with this, you should read your textbook. Thanks for watching.